Good afternoon. My name is Janice. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Morgan's Care and Connection, and we're here today with Kathryne from Movin Out, and we're going to learn about rental options for people with disabilities to live safely and securely in non-segregated settings. So if you could start off with, I don't know, I guess telling us what community integrated supported housing is.
Sure. Hi, Janice. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm Kathryne Auerback again with Movin Out. And we were actually founded by a group of parents of children with disabilities who were interested in finding resources for this exact reason, and they couldn't find any, so they founded Movin Out. So this is kind of our whole reason for being, if you will. Community integrated supported housing. It may be referred to as supported living. It may go by some other names, but essentially what it means is that the individual, the person with disabilities, owns or leases the housing in their own name.
Okay.
It means that they remain in their home even if their support provider changes. So if there's any need for a change, whether their needs change or their preferences change, they don't have to move to make a change in their supportive services. They stay there. The staffing arrangements are based on those preferences and needs for that individual person. So they're tailored for the individual, and they can change and adapt as the needs and preferences of the individual changes, as we just said. It can include supports ranging from 24/7 live-in support to live near support, or to come in or drop in kind of support based on a pre-planned schedule, again, tailored to those individual needs. The supported living company or the supportive services provider sends the caregivers or the caregiver to the individual's home.
Okay.
So that is the core of what this category of housing is all about. It's regular housing in regular neighborhoods. Of course, the rental housing that Movin Out develops, we have a focus on accessibility features that go above and beyond kind of the minimum requirements. But even in our multifamily properties, no more than 20 to 25% of the units are designated as supported units, and they're mixed throughout the properties. So when we say integrated, we mean really, really integrated.
Oh, cool. That's nice to hear, because, a lot of times people with disabilities are separated from everybody else. That was the case with our daughter. She was in a home with other people with disabilities. So I wish I would have known about this then. It would have given us more options. But that's the good part about learning more now, is we can share this information with other families so that they know that they do have other options.
Yeah.
So I can start to hear like the benefits of the community integrated supported living. Maybe you could just elaborate on that, if there's anything else that, you could share with us.
Absolutely. Movin Out views the work we do through the lens of civil rights and social justice. Choosing your own house or apartment to live in, controlling who comes through your front door. That's kind of the overarching metaphor that we use to think about this from that perspective, from that benefit. Controlling who comes through your own front door, making your own choices, even if those need to be supported choices.
Sure.
But still making your own choices about, who is helping you with very intimate daily activities, whether that's dressing or toileting or meals or, whatever the level of care might be or the level of support that's needed, it's still very, very personal. And so we feel like that's really important to have control over who comes in and out your front door. There's a really loud plane out there. I hope that's not disturbing this too much. I'm sorry.
No, we can't
Um,
hear anything.
oh, good. Okay. I'm trying to act like I don't hear it, roaring in my ear. Choosing your support agency and hiring your own caregivers, again, for these very personal services that are being provided, being able to make that choice yourself is really important. And also, if for any reason that relationship is not working out, whether it's whatever the reason is, whether it's just not a good fit or the needs change and the skills aren't a good match, that can be changed and you get to decide that.
Without changing your environment, which
Again,
for
without
a
having to
lot of
pack up and
individuals with
move.
disabilities, that's huge.
It's huge for everyone. I
Right,
mean,
right,
I
right,
hate moving. Who wants to move?
right.
It's very stressful. If you go to to the doctor for your annual checkup and they do that depression screening, have you moved in the last 12 months? It's
Mhm.
very stressful. It's
Mhm.
very stressful. So we try to avoid that. It's also very expensive,
Yeah.
and people with disabilities are often living on limited fixed incomes. So, to the extent that we can prevent that as well, that's another reason that that's important. Again, that more individualized support. When you have that more individualized support,
Mhm.
that leads to greater self-determination, greater independence and control over your home and schedule. Um, we have seen example after example after example of folks who come in to living in their own independent, community integrated supported housing situation for the first time with a much higher level of care need that decreases over time because they learn those skills, they gain independence, and they um, thrive in that environment. Again, just like anyone would.
Mhm.
If I have three sons who don't have any physical disabilities or limitations that would prevent them from, for example, doing their own laundry. But if I always do their laundry for them, they will never learn how to do it.
Mhm.
They'll just never learn how to do it. Um, if my mother cooked all of our meals, all the way up to leaving home, I would never have learned how to cook myself a meal,
Sure.
So it's giving folks that opportunity to learn and grow, as appropriate based on their own individual situations.
We found
And
that with our daughter where, like you said, and a lot of times, let's just be honest, it's like working with a young child. Sometimes it's just easier. Okay. Maybe it takes less time, but that doesn't mean that we're helping achieve
right,
independence by not knowing what their limitations are or what they are capable of doing. I mean, we found out that Morgan was capable of reaching the microwave and using it. But based on what other practices were being done in the house, nobody was pushing to find out what those limitations were. And, like doing laundry, whether that was an option or not an option, front loader versus a top, because she was in a wheelchair. But again, yes, it might take longer to teach and learn, but in the end, it helps achieve more independence, or at least as parents, for us to know what those limitations may be realistically.
sure,
Because I think a lot of times we impose these limitations and they're not actually really there. So I think
right,
this is super
yeah.
important. for parents to know that just because you have disabilities, whether it's physical or cognitive, that, and yeah, things might take longer, but you might find out that there are some things that they can do just because you give them the ability to be able to do it. So
Exactly.
this is super important.
Exactly.
I love the sounds.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
great.
And beyond that, um, I think we might have talked about this a little bit in the last session, you know, being surrounded by neighbors who can become acquaintances and friends and supporters, um, is important for the person with disabilities living in that supported unit. It's also valuable to the whole community, to have that kind of diversity in a community strengthens the whole community. It's an opportunity for folks to share their gifts and talents and become an active member of their own community rather than being isolated from their community. Do I want to live with a roommate or do I not want to live with a roommate? Maybe I want to have a roommate. Maybe that's a person with disabilities, but that doesn't mean all of my neighbors are people with disabilities
Mhm. Well, the other
because
thing
we
too
all
is
benefit from that.
right, totally. The other thing too is it builds community awareness. Our son, our youngest, grew up with an older sister in a wheelchair. So we went to a lot of spina bifida events where maybe one was using crutches and someone else was in a wheelchair, but someone else was capable of walking on their own. And he got to see all these levels of accessibility and disabilities. And so like he didn't even think twice and still doesn't. Like it just is been part of his world his whole life. And so I think bringing that awareness to our communities helps people realize maybe like limitations, for example, parking, big frustration. Why are those lines there? Why is it important to have the right side or the left side accessible? Like just things like that, that
Mhm.
maybe people might become more aware of being around it. And so I think that this is huge. And I hope that people do pay attention and become more mindful of situations like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so how does someone decide on the right type of rental home for their needs and preferences?
This is going to be one of those responses where the answer isn't really very different than it would be for anyone
Okay.
when we're choosing where we want to live. Um, what is the environment that we're most interested in that we feel would be best for us? Is that a more dense, urban environment? Is it a quieter suburban environment? Is it a more kind of isolated rural environment? What kinds of amenities do we want to have nearby, whether that's employment, shopping, healthcare, education? What are the transportation
I was going to say
options,
that because
right?
those get more and more limited every day. Yeah.
Is
So
there public
transportation.
transit? Is it walkable? There are lots of communities that are in the US that are designed around cars, and a sidewalk even doesn't even exist on a residential road. So those kinds of considerations that any of us would make. Do we want to live in a multifamily setting, like an apartment building or in a condo building, or do we want to live in a smaller building like a duplex or a 4-unit building, or do we want to rent maybe, or we can, this is a separate conversation, but we can talk about home ownership too. But do we want to rent a single family home, a detached house? And if it's in an apartment building, what are the resident services that are available?
Mhm.
So again, making sure that those supportive services are selected by the individual, that they're not attached to the housing. Um, organizations like Movin Out, we offer something called resident services coordination. That means we're not providing in-home supportive services. We're not providing in-home care services, but we're helping to fill that gap in between supportive services and property management.
Okay.
Because oftentimes, property managers are focused, as they should be, on kind of what they call the walls and halls. They're taking care of the property. That's why it's called property management. The residents are kind of part of that, but situations can come up for folks with disabilities that are kind of outside the box, or idiosyncratic kind of things that might happen. And sometimes it's not a supportive services issue, and it's not really a property management issue, or there's maybe some kind of problem, and we can step in and help advocate for the resident. Because we speak all those languages. We speak the property management language. In most cases, we're the owner, so the property manager is working for us, and so we can tell them, no, don't do it that way, do it that way. So making sure that if you do choose a multifamily apartment building, that kind of service exists there, or at least that the property management company has experience in managing properties that include supported units. And then, of course, now that I've decided what environment I want and what kind of building I want to live in, does that exist in the community where I want to live? Is that available in my community? And are the supportive services I need available in that community? Unfortunately, supportive service agencies don't cover every corner of the state of Wisconsin currently. So that's an important consideration, of course. What kind of housing am I used to living in? Do I want something completely new and different than what I've ever experienced before? Maybe not. Am I sensitive to noises or smells that come along with living in an apartment building? I would, just before we started, our office is in the ground floor of one of our apartment buildings, and somebody upstairs was, I'm not sure if they were tap dancing or what exactly, but it was really loud for a minute, and it stopped, but I'm used to that. Other folks might not be used to that, and that might be disturbing or upsetting, and so that might mean, not a good idea to live in an apartment, or not a good idea to live on the ground floor, maybe live on the top floor, something like that. We just think about those kinds of issues. Somebody's cooking something spicy, or, barbecuing or something. And if you're sensitive to that kind of thing, that's something else to think about too. And then making sure that the kinds of little amenities essentially that you want are available. Are you used to having a yard, a patio? Are you used to having just a shower, or do you really want to make sure you have a bathtub? What kind of kitchen are you used to using? Do you want to have access to fitness equipment, or, a workout room? Just those kinds of considerations and things that, again,
Anybody would have.
Anybody would have those same considerations. Yeah.
Absolutely. So earlier in the conversation, you mentioned something about fixed income or limited income. So can someone with a limited income afford a rental home?
It depends. It's getting harder and harder. If I'm being completely honest, 4 or 5 years ago, I would have said, oh yes, absolutely. But the cost of living has increased for everyone, and it has gotten more challenging for affordable housing providers and for folks who need affordable housing. There's a tremendous shortage of affordable housing. A huge percentage of people on limited incomes, people with households that have low incomes or very low incomes, including fixed incomes, are rent burdened or housing burdened. And what that means is that they're paying more than 50% of their total income on housing. That just does not leave enough for other basic needs. So it is a challenge. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's difficult because there's just such a terrible shortage of affordable housing everywhere in our country, and Wisconsin, unfortunately, is no exception.
Sure.
But there are a number of different types of affordable housing, and it's good to understand what those are. There are some housing opportunities that are what we call naturally occurring affordable housing. That means that they're not subsidized in any way. It's just that the landlord is just offering that housing at an affordable rental price for
Okay.
whatever reason, just because they haven't raised the rent very much over time. Maybe they've owned the property for a long time and they're, not trying to maximize their profits for whatever reason. There are some units like that out there. It's not easy to find them. There's not like you can't go to the internet and type in, naturally occurring affordable housing in Madison and get a list of all the, it unfortunately doesn't work like that. But they do exist, and oftentimes finding out about that is kind of a word of mouth situation. Sometimes there are forums on social media or other online forums where people can share that kind of information. Hey, I'm moving out of this apartment and it's a great rent, and I understand they're not going to increase it very much. So if somebody's looking, this one's coming up, or something like that,
Sure.
something informal. Then there are several types of subsidies that can help make rental housing affordable. Probably folks have heard of some of these terms, but they can be very confusing. So I'll just mention them briefly. I know we don't have all afternoon because I could go on about this all afternoon, but there are two different kinds of Section 8 vouchers. And the way that those work is that it's based on paying 30% of your income for rent. So there's either a portable voucher, which is issued to the individual or to the household, and they can use that voucher any place. And if a landlord says we don't accept those, you're going to want to have a conversation with the Fair Housing Association about that, because that's not how those are supposed to work. And then there's project-based, which means that the unit has the voucher.
Okay.
So a specific unit is a voucher is attached to a specific unit of housing. And so the government basically provides additional funding to the owner to subsidize that rent amount up to the regular rate, but the resident, the tenant, only pays the 30% of their income. The other type of subsidy that we have here in Wisconsin is sometimes referred to as Section 42 or tax credit housing. Sometimes it's called low income housing tax credits. Most of the multifamily projects that we've developed are based on this subsidy, but they may also include other types of subsidies. But this means that essentially the entire building is subsidized.
Okay.
And it can vary, but most of our properties are mixed income. So there are units that will be designated for people at different income levels based on the area median income, which is another way of saying the county median income. And that is a typical way that someone gets qualified for a specific subsidized unit. In Dane County, of course, the median income is quite high compared to some other counties across the state. And so that means that even a subsidized apartment in an area with a high area median income is going to be a higher rent.
Okay. I see I
Yeah.
see another empowerment session coming our way.
It's, yeah, as I said, we could talk all afternoon about those technical aspects, but essentially there are ways that make it affordable either by you paying uh, a rent amount that's based on 30% of your income, or you paying a rent amount that's based on the area median income at different levels.
No, this is all super important because again, like we could all go down a rabbit hole trying to figure this stuff out,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
getting little bits and pieces are a great place to start. So like I said, I think that
Yeah.
we definitely have value in maybe doing another one and breaking that down just a little bit more.
Absolutely, absolutely. And sometimes things are so specific to the individual, and we're a housing counseling agency. We have housing counselors who are trained in home ownership as well as rental housing, and anyone can call us anytime for that kind of information. We can help explain that.
Okay. A question that people might have, with independence and stuff is safety concerns. So what about safety concerns?
This comes up a lot, usually from parents, not usually from the not usually
Right.
from the child, no matter how old they are. Uh, I've been, I'm a parent, as I said. I'm not going to dismiss anyone's concerns about safety for their children. That's our job as parents. Um, but I'll share with you some facts, and these are the facts. I've been working with Moving Out for almost 6.5 years. We have about 350 units of supported rental housing across the state. We have over 1,500 total units of rental housing, and about 350 of those are supported units. We have a lot of residents with disabilities in our properties across the state. Not one issue with respect to safety has come up in my history with this organization, and I'm not aware of any before my tenure here. It is not any different statistically than it would be for you and I living in, I many decades ago when I lived in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I went away to a conference and came back, and my apartment had been broken into and all my stuff was gone. And all my friends were like, "You're gonna stay in that apartment?" And I was like, "Well, my odds are better now. It's already been broken into."
Right.
Oh, my point is that odds are no different. The statistics are no different for people with disabilities than for any of us living wherever we live. Abuse and neglect are actually more prevalent in group home settings. People with disabilities living in congregated settings with only one or two staff present at any time are more vulnerable than they would be living in this apartment building with their neighbors around them, and everybody in this building knows who lives here and who doesn't live here, and who's a stranger and who's not a stranger, and what's a normal activity and what's not a normal activity. So the same safety precautions apply. Again, this isn't wildly different, if different at all, than it would be for anyone. Get to know your neighbors, be aware of your surroundings, report anything suspicious. Consider technology based on your needs. Lots of people have Ring doorbells now on their front doors, and there are other technology tools available for higher levels of security depending on the individual's needs. We have some folks who have technology devices that send an alert if the door is opened, or if the window is opened, or you can set these things up for just about any level of security that's needed. But that's really the same for everyone, avoiding concentrating or segregating people with disabilities, because again, that creates more vulnerability.
Sure.
So if you're looking at an apartment building or a multifamily building, whether it's condos or apartments, you want to make sure there's no more than 25% of the units designated as supported units. And are those supported units scattered throughout the property and not clustered in any way? We've, properties like that exist too, where all of the people with disabilities live in one side of the building, and the others are for people without disabilities, I guess. How would you even say that? I mean, it's whatever. I shouldn't be so judgy, but
It's
it's
okay.
hard
It's
not
okay.
to be.
So to wrap this up,
Yeah.
how would people get started on the path?
Well, ideally, you would start maybe with a conversation with your IRIS consultant or with your family care representative. Learn about the funding that is available for you for supportive services based on your needs and preferences. Learn about the supported living agencies in your area, or the home care services, or community supported living services. They go by lots of different names, but your IRIS or family care contact can usually provide you some references or some lists of potential support service agencies. Search for the kind of housing that you want, get that funding approved through IRIS or family care. Work with the supported living agency to define what their services will be based on your needs. And then sometimes, training staff, you might want to consider whether you want to do that in the family home or in the new home. Maybe with family along in the new location for that additional communication and support.
Sure.
And then, moving in doesn't have to be all at once. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. We have some situations where folks will spend maybe just 1 or 2 days a week in their new apartment for the first few weeks, and then gradually increase the number of days that they spend in their new home.
Sure.
Or, their family members will maybe spend more time with them in their new home at first and gradually kind of scale back. It's very individualized. And again, going back to the beginning of the conversation, that's the beauty of this approach, is that it's entirely flexible based on how you and your family want to approach it. There's nobody telling you this is the support schedule, this is the meal schedule, this is, when we're going to do activities. It's all tailored because it's independent and integrated.